Welcome to the Wokest Warren, where we have the Wokest Discourse. Tonight, I am going to talk to you about Chapter 7 of a book I'm reading called Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor by Rob Nixon. It was published by Harvard University Press in 2011. So, Chapter 7 is about depleted uranium. If you're my age, you will remember when the U.S. government said that Gulf War syndrome was a hoax. They had to admit that they knew all along that people were getting sick from depleted uranium in 2008. So since 2008, the U.S. military recognizes Gulf War illness in veterans. At least as far as I understand. I know that veterans are having trouble getting treatment and getting coverage because I saw like a Netflix special about it. But at least they admit it exists now. Gulf War illness is a thing that exists. So let me just tell you a couple things that I learned about Gulf War illness, which it's called Gulf War illness, but you don't have to be in the Persian Gulf to get it. You just have to be exposed to depleted uranium. And in fact, there was depleted uranium found in the groundwater near Concord, Massachusetts, near a factory where they made depleted uranium munitions. One of the things that happens from depleted uranium poisoning is it makes your semen radioactive. It puts uranium in your semen. So the wives of male veterans were complaining that after sex, they would have burning in their vaginas. And the doctor said that they were hysterical and it was all in their head. And it comes to turn out that they were getting uranium in their vagina. No joke. Like, this is for real. So one of the things I learned in this chapter is that depleted uranium was also used in, let's see, a long list of places. Afghanistan, Chechnya, Serbia, Bosnia, and some other locations. So anywhere in the world that depleted uranium is used, you can develop this illness. And depleted uranium has a 4.5 million year half-life or billion. Does it matter? Does it matter if it's 4.5 million or 4.5 billion? Probably not. So, the city that is most affected by this is Basra, which is in Iraq, which in Iraq, everybody knows that people in Basra have like a really high rate of miscarriage and of genetic mutations of their children because of the depleted uranium. Now, the doctors for the U.S. government said that it's not caused by depleted uranium because uranium is a heavy metal. And they're like, well, if it's a heavy metal, it's not going to fly through the air. Well, that's complete bullshit because, in fact, uranium particles attach to sand. And when the sand gets blown, the uranium will blow anywhere that the sand goes. The same thing with lead, by the way. gardeners in Ohio are cautioned about lead-contaminated soil, not because it will poison the plants, but because when you're digging in it and you're pulling weeds, the soil, the lead that's in the soil, the dust goes up in the air, and then you breathe that lead in and you get lead poisoning that way. Same idea, same concept with uranium. The bigger point that the author in this book is trying to make is that when we talk about war casualties, they talk about bodies. Like, this many people were shot, this many people got bombed, and they don't count like all the casualties. With the case of depleted uranium, the casualties are like Agent Orange. They continue for decades later. Babies that are born in Vietnam today are still being impacted by Agent Orange. And that was over 50 years ago. For the next 4.5 million years, children in Iraq are going to be affected by this depleted uranium. Now, something I figured out. I read in this piece that one of the reasons why they did not want to admit that depleted uranium was a health hazard was because of the equipment. If they admitted that depleted uranium was a health hazard, they would have to admit that all of the equipment that they brought to Kuwait was contaminated with radioactivity. And they wanted to use that equipment again. So they had to hide that fact. So what ended up happening was they brought all the equipment. In my mind, I'm imagining it was like Jeeps, but who knows what other types of equipment they had. Tanks, I don't know. Helicopters, tanks, that type of stuff. They brought it back to, I believe, Alabama. It was later found to be contaminated with radiation, and it cost $100 million to clean it up. So we know for a fact that they used depleted uranium in Afghanistan. Do you remember when they left, the United States ended the Afghan occupation, and they left like tanks and helicopters and Jeeps and every kind of equipment imaginable? They just left it in Afghanistan. It was on the front page of the paper. Well, at the time, it didn't bother me because I was like, the way technology is, the equipment will probably be technologically outdated by the time before it will be used again in another war, because the tech cycle is so fast, you know. Something that was manufactured 20 years ago is not going to be like what you're going to want on the battlefield today. So, but a lot of people were mad about it because they were like, oh, they're just handing all this equipment over to the Afghan military, in effect, because they were abandoning it, and they're our enemy. Well, they weren't supposed to be our enemy. So that's problematic. But I think that part of the reason why that equipment was left behind in Afghanistan is because they didn't leave the equipment behind in Kuwait. They brought it back to Alabama, ended up being radioactive. They had to spend $100 million cleaning it up. What are the chances that those helicopters and Jeeps and tanks that they left in Afghanistan, where depleted uranium was used in combat, what are the chances that all that equipment was radioactive and that was the reason it was left behind? I'm saying it's non-zero. There's some chance that equipment is radioactive. And they didn't say anything at the time because they don't want people to think about how depleted uranium shells are made. Is they take nuclear waste, which is uranium. It's a metal, but it often contains plutonium, though, because there's no way to filter the plutonium. Maybe there's a way to filter the plutonium out. I don't know. All I know is there's this nuclear waste. It's uranium-236, and it has traces of plutonium in it. And they give it to the manufacturers that make shells, like anti-tank shells, to make artillery shells with it. And then when those shells are detonated, it spreads like all of these tiny, they call them ceramic aerosols. These teeny, teeny, tiny little particles that are too tiny to be filtered out with a respirator because they're so small. And so all that stuff goes into the environment, and people breathe it in, it pollutes the groundwater, and it turns whatever place that you just bombed with it into a radioactive hellhole for the next 4.5 million years. Or billion, depending, because it doesn't really matter. This is what I'm talking about when I say that, 30 years tops we've got for this world. We just do not have long to live at this rate. The level of poisoning that we are experiencing, first of all, with the microplastics, but, also with radioactivity, also with PCBs or whatever, it's all killing us. It's killing us. It's killing the animals. It's bad for the environment. Thanks for listening.